informal, but also somehow well coordinated for us to be able to unpack more about this legacy of our former president, Daniel Torotich Arap Moi. Without taking much of the time, kindly allow me to bring in Davis Malombe to open this session with some opening remarks. Welcome, Davis.
Because I think my laptop. So allow me to use my phone because my laptop has audio problems. So allow me to take this opportunity to invite you to this conversation, which is being held during a day which is normally dedicated for discussing more issues. I remember the day was inaugurated in 1988 when we were in class 8, when we were celebrating 10 years of Moism. But I think after the new constitution in 2010, Moi Day was scrapped because if you look at the constitution, the only days which have been dedicated are Madaraka Day, Jamhuri Day, and the Mashujaa Day. So Moi Day was somehow removed from our calendar of public holidays, and then it later came back in the form of Utamaduni Day. So we're having this informal conversation to just discuss our own perspectives about what we know about the regime and legacy of Moi, just to give a bit of political context. This country went through horrible colonial rule, which ended with so much human rights violations. And if you go through the TJRC report, it's very clear in volume 1. In fact, it says, let me paraphrase, the commission finds that between 1895 and 1963, the British colonial administration in Kenya was responsible for unspeakable and horrific gross human rights violations. And then when Kenyatta took over, he said, we are going to forgive and forget, and then move forward. And I think that's where we laid the seed for impunity and the lack of accountability in the country. And again, the TJRC report talks about so many atrocities which were committed by President Kenyatta between 1963 to 1978. Allow me to quote the TJRC report. It says the commission finds that between 1963 and 1978, President Jomo Kenyatta.
Audible?
Okay.
You can be audible so that you can be heard.
So let me proceed. So thank you for that. So the TJRC report also says that the commission finds that between 1963 and 1978, President Jomo Kenyatta presided over a government that was responsible for numerous gross violations of human rights, and those are already documented. So when Moi took over in 1978, he said he's going to fuata nyayo, which means following the footsteps of Mzee Kenyatta. And for those of us who have been working on human rights and procedural justice issues, we normally say he did not disappoint when he said that, because he continued with that regime of impunity and gross violations of human rights. And that's why, again, the TJRC report says the commission finds that between 1978 and 2002, President Daniel Arap Moi presided over a government that was responsible for numerous gross violations of human rights, which include massacres, unlawful detention, assassinations, including Dr. Robert Ouko, illegal and illegal allocation of land, economic crimes, among others. So the TJRC reports remain one of the official documents where most of the violations which are committed by the different regimes have been documented, and there's never been proper mechanisms for just revisiting that, discussing that, and getting some kind of remedies. So when Moi left office in 2002, a lot of was expected in terms of revisiting the past, and that's why some of these mechanisms were set up. But a lot of cover-up happened between 2003 and 2013 when Kibaki left office. I remember there was a task force which was established in 2003, but it never moved forward because the recommendation was to set up a truth commission by June 2004. And what happened in June 2004? Moi Kibaki came up with a coalition government which brought on board people who are working under Kanu, and that compromised the whole agenda. I remember around that time discussing with Mheshimiwa Kwegwa Mwere about what could have compromised that. And I remember he told me what Kibaki was reminded was that he was the one who was signing the detention orders when he was the vice president and the minister for internal affairs. And therefore, that then brought a situation whereby we were not able to revisit the problems of Moism. I remember again in October 2004, when activists went to Freedom Corner and tried to destroy those Moirugus, because that was the context where people felt that it was the time to destroy all the symbols of Kanuism. And they were basically arrested and taken to court for those kind of attempts. So then Uhuru takes over, and Uhuru and the Ruto were also part of the Kanuism between 2002, when Uhuru was the running mate for Kanu. So again, we find a situation when Moi dies in February last year, the media was seriously mobilized to continue with this narrative of cover-up. And KHRC mobilized the National Victims and Torture Group to go to Nyaus just to try to bring a different kind of narrative. But I think that was not given also the adequate visibility because of the way the media was operating at that time. And thereafter, there was COVID, which means there was also no adequate space to discuss this kind of issues. In February 18 this year, that is the day which is basically dedicated to remembering Dead Kimathi. We had an event with the torture and survivor victims. We went to Nyaus, and it was very difficult to even access the torture chambers because of the way NIS has been able also to control that space. Because for a long time, Nyaus has also been a protected area. Therefore, I think we need to find ways of also claiming the former torture chambers because Nyaus is one of the symbols of Moi's repression. And therefore, when we are discussing this kind of situation, as KHRC, we also find ourselves partly conflicted because KHRC was established by activists who were exiled by the same government of Moi. Most of the work KHRC was doing during the time of Moi was also documenting and also responding to the violations committed by his government. KHRC was also very much involved in the campaigning for his removal and of course the removal of Kanu in 2002. So we find I think we are very clear in terms of how the Moi regime has been because of the kind of work we do as human rights defenders. But we believe there's a need for more conversations from the different actors in terms of our perspectives and also our persuasions. And we started this debate last year under the leadership of George, when we started the debate about the Kenyatta legacy. And we are investing so much on memorialization, which is just having discussions about what has happened, because currently it's also very difficult to also push for reparations around some of the past atrocities. So we believe one of the best ways of also pushing this agenda is to have dialogues and a discussion about some of these regimes, which have been responsible for so many human rights violations. So we have a number of panelists who have suffered different kinds of violations and have also had their own experiences about Moism. We have also been joined by some of the victims, including the family of Mukaru Nganga. So they are going to be part of the people giving us also very personal reflections about their experiences. And of course, we have Washida Waire, who is the national coordinator of the National Victims Network, and Njoroge Mwingai, who are part of the ex-82 Air Force, among others. So this group will also be sharing their experiences as victims, as we also get perspective from our panelists. So with those few remarks, I wish all of us very fruitful, candid, and critical conversation about Moism. But I think moving forward, we need to find ways of also pushing for the implementation of some of the reports like the TJRC, which has very good documentation about what Moi did and also recommendations on how to ensure remedies for these atrocities. You remember when he was leaving office in 2002, he never gave any kind of apology. He just said in passing, kama nilikukosea nisamee, kama ulinikosea nisamee. So I think when it comes to remedy, there has to be clarity. There has to be a very clear acceptance of the wrong the perpetrator did, so that broader mechanisms of reparation can be put in place. So I think a lot needs to be done, especially in the context where the current politics is also dominated by the people who also were also brought up under Kanuru, Kina Musalia Mudavadi, Kalonzo Musyoka, William Ruto, Gideon Moi. So I think also the context of our current politics also gives us some kind of food for thought in terms of how far Moi's legacy continue to impact the politics of the country. But I think from the human rights point of view, a lot of discussion needs to happen around what should be done around the violations he committed, the violations Kijana committed, and also the violations the Kibaki government committed, because also the TJRC also documents some of those things. So with those many remarks, I thank you and welcome all of us to this very critical conversation. And we are going to have more of this kind of political dialogues in this country. Asanteni sana.
Hi, Soila, you are muted.
Sorry.
Hello.
Sorry, I may have been speaking while muted. So allow me to just thank Davis Malombe, who is the acting director of Kenya Human Rights Commission, for giving us and opening this conversation. It's an important conversation, especially from where KHRC comes from, being an organization that can speak about the historical elements of and what really happened during the Moi's era, including and also in appreciating the human rights elements. Allow me to thank our panelists who've joined us already. We expect more to come on board. Currently, I appreciate the presence of Mheshimiwa Koigi Wamwere, who is going to give us clear insights of his experiences during the Moi era. We have Jerotich Sei, who's also going to give us her good experiences, and also Muthoni Kamau, I had seen her here, who is also can give us her experiences during the Moi's era. To continue with the conversation, I want to invite George Kegoro. George Kegoro is the Executive Director of Open Society Initiative of Eastern Africa, to give us a background of this conversation. Why is this conversation important, and why do we need to continue having it, even as we appreciate the leadership that keeps evolving day in on every season of our elections. Karibu sana, George.
Thank you very much, Soila. Thank you very much, friends and colleagues. I'm very, very happy to see so many of you in this conversation. So I would say that Daniel Arap Moi succeeded Jomo Kenyatta as president of Kenya in 1978 and remained in power until 2002, a period of 24 years, when he retired on account of presidential term limits. By the sheer length of his term in office, Moi is destined to be one of the most important leaders in Kenyan history. Initially popular when he took power, Moi's popularity gradually reduced as the economy faced difficulties, with concerns of human rights abuses increasingly becoming a dominant way of characterizing his government. Following domestic agitation, which enjoyed significant international support, partly the result of the end of the Cold War, Moi reinstated multi-party politics in 1991, which had been banned through a constitutional amendment, and went on to win the next two multi-party presidential elections, the ones of 1992 and 1997, even though significant political violence marred the elections. Also, a major financial scandal formed the backdrop to the 1992 electoral victory, and we know that scandal today as the Golden Bag scandal. Moi clearly cared about how he would be remembered, introducing Moi Day as a public holiday in 1988, which in its renamed version was celebrated yesterday. The main purpose of this conversation, as I see it, is to bring together such a compelling group of panelists to explore a collective way of remembering Moi, who is one of the most consequential leaders in Kenyan history. How we remember Moi is important because he himself wanted to be remembered and set about deliberately to establish ways in which he would be remembered. Obviously, those ways are favorable to him, and that is quite understandable. Secondly, and as has been said, Moi's close associates took power after he left office and have taken responsibility for how his legacy is to be managed, projecting him as best as possible in the most favorable way. Whereas that is important and for him and necessary, it is also important that there is a balanced view of Moi, and a balanced view of Moi would only be possible if we are also able to find space for the more critical voices, such as those that are represented in this conversation today. Secondly, as a key actor or in our past, the public memory of Moi is important for understanding the present and for planning the future. As Davis has already said, Moi not only took over on the basis of continuity from Kenyatta in a government that had significantly abusive elements, but also extended those elements during his own rule. And the country is currently still grappling with how to manage and overcome those experiences. Understanding what happened on a historical basis is important for understanding the present and also for defining the future. And that is why I think we need to discuss more, and this conversation is important. As I said earlier, the trigger for the conversation being what's the day that used to be Moi Day seems natural to me, because it is the day that was set aside by Moi, who really craved to be remembered, and we are doing a good thing by remembering him. It's just that we are taking charge of how we want to remember him, and we may end up remembering him favorably, as I think he hoped he would be remembered, but also giving space to the more critical elements of his memory to surface, so that there's a balanced discussion of what this very consequential leader did when he was in power. So that is how I view this conversation, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, George, for that context and the need for us to continue this conversation. Indeed, it's an important conversation, and that the information that the story was not enough for this nation, knowing that so much had happened under the 24 rule, maybe positively or negative. So we really need to continue so that people and also the growing and the coming nations can understand where we are coming from and the need for them to protect human rights at all costs. So thank you very much for that insightful and very good context around Moi Day. As we continue this conversation, I want to invite a very long-time serving politician and also an author and also a human rights activist. who's been, during the Moi era, a politician and also a leader in Nakuru County. Koigi Wamwere has seen the good and the bad, let me say the good and the bad during those eras. And he's available to tell us his own experiences, what it meant to be a leader during the Moi's era, and whether there is need for us to ever change this country to a better leadership. These conversations come at a time that we are leading, or we are headed to our next election season, coming up next year, 2022. It is a conversation that can also shape up our leadership. What do we need to see for ourselves in this country so that we realize the full implementation of our new constitution and also respect to human rights. Bwana Koigi, karibu sana. Please take us through your experiences.
Thank you very much. I think I will start by correcting my friend Malobe that my detention was signed by Kibaki. I have had, during Kenyatta and Moi regimes, I went through 2 detentions. The first detention under Kenyatta was signed by Ole Tipis, by Daniel Arap Moi. And my second detention under Moi was signed by Tipis. But the fact that Kibaki did not sign the 2 detentions does not exempt him from the ills of the regime in which he was a member. There are many other things that Kibaki did against me personally that are more serious than even detention. I remember when I was kidnapped in Busia, and there was the news of my arrest and incarceration in Nyayo House. Kibaki made a statement that I should not be shown an iota of mercy by the government. That's how bad I was. If I survived, it was not because Kibaki willed it. Maybe it's because his wish was probably considered too extreme, that I should be hanged or whatever. For me, let me say that the legacies of Moi are shared by the other leaders by Kenyatta, who came before him, and also by Kibaki's government, because Kibaki was also part of Kenyatta government as well as Moi's government. And after Kibaki, so Kibaki cannot be exempted from blame for things that were done by Kenyatta's government and Moi's government. Then, of course, there was his government, which promised us a lot of things, but did not deliver everything or most of what he had promised. In particular, I remember that Kibaki had promised that if he came to power, he would tell us who had assassinated J.M. Kariuki. In fact, he said that even if it took 100 years, people would be told who had killed J.M. Kariuki. But again, destiny and God seems to have been more favorable to Kibaki than he thought. He didn't need to wait 100 years for us to know who had killed J.M. Kariuki, because a few years after he had made that statement, he became president himself. And my feeling is that as a president, he was privy to secrets of the state, some which were about who had killed J.M. Kariuki, but he kept quiet, more quiet than even Moi had over the same matter. So my feeling about legacies is that state legacies are shared. You might be attributing a particular legacy to Moi, but the same applies to Kenyatta and also Kibaki and Uhuru, because the state is one, and I think that when it is inherited intact. So people who run the government, sometimes they do so on behalf of those who have gone before them, in the sense that now they become part of the state. It is their responsibility to ensure that the sins of the state are taken care of. Like, for instance, just the other day, Moi's son, Gideon Moi, said that he was accepting on behalf of KANU all the bad things, or some of the bad things that the KANU government did. And he went further to say that as KANU, they would try and make corrections for these offenses. I don't know how, because his admissions that the KANU government had made mistakes, had tortured people, had persecuted, had committed crimes against citizens, was not the first. He was not the first one to state these things. Before him, we all remember that Uhuru Kenyatta also admitted that actually apologized on behalf of past government for crimes that they had committed against citizens. But we have waited for 10 years or 9 years, and the acknowledgements that Uhuru was supposed to make, and his also failure to ensure that there has been redress for what has been committed against citizens. I mean, it's very loud. Now he is about to leave power before he has put right the sins of his father and those of Moi and Kibaki before him. And I am not sure that these things will be put right. In any case, what I feel is that one of Moi's worst legacies was the question of dictatorship, especially the one-party dictatorship, because he's the one who made one-party dictatorship de jure by orchestrating the passage of Section 2A or insertion of Section 2A in the then Constitution. And I remember that I have, as a leader and as a member of Parliament, I had never felt as much fear as I felt that day when we passed that Section 2A to be put into the Constitution. We had all been called and been threatened that our detention orders had already been signed, and what was left was just filling in the names of people who would dare oppose the passage of that, the change of that Constitution. Obviously, there is all evidence that despite the fact that that the government has changed hands, the problem of dictatorship has continued to ravage, and sometimes it may not look as to most of us as being very brutal, But to those people, to the people who have suffered brutality in the hands of our government, will agree that we have a dictatorship, and it is to those people who are victims. It is just as brutal as what it was when some of us were victims. And I say that I dare list the dictatorship as one of Moi's legacies, because under both dictatorships, that of Kenyatta and Moi, I was detained for 13 years. Under Kenyatta, 3.5 years, and under Moi, 9 years. And if a regime that can incarcerate someone without charge or trial for 13 years is not a dictatorship, then one wonders what it would be. There was the other thing, the other legacy of dictatorship in Kenya is that it has been inherited by a crop of leaders, the current leadership that we have in the country, that if it became necessary, they would probably unleash dictatorship with the same violence and cruelty as the dictatorship of Kenyatta and Moi. But it is terrible to think that as another legacy of Moi is the fact that the current leaders are all his children. And I remember during the funeral, almost all of them, the ones that, especially the ones who are seeking presidency, they all stood there before Moi's before Moi's body, and confessed to him. I don't know why it was necessary to tell Moi that they had been his children, but I think by saying that they were Moi's sons and daughters politically, they were not just swearing loyalty to his leadership, but also saying that if they got a chance to run the government, they would run it the same way that Moi had done. So the leadership bad leadership has been a legacy of Moi's rule, and it remains so because these people who are at the top of leadership are themselves convinced that what they are doing is right. And I will probably mention something which is rather shortly that might prove that Moi was not just a dictator, but he was not willing to be different when he got a chance. I had visited Moi at his home at Kabrak, and we had been having a conversation. And I reminded him of something I had noticed when we were coming from Nyahururu, from Laikipia for a meeting. And I reminded him that the people who had lined up on the road from Laikipia on the way to Kabrak had been singing, had been chanting, Joshua, Joshua, Joshua. And I asked him whether he accepted what the people were saying by calling him Joshua. And he asked me, what does that mean? And I told him that according to my understanding, the people are still in the desert because Kenyatta has died before taking them to Canaan. And now that their Moses is dead, they want Joshua and Caleb to lead them out of the desert and take them to Canaan. So I asked him, are you, sir, willing to be people's Joshua and take them to Canaan? And he did not answer my question. He just looked at me without a reply. Then I asked him again, and he did the same. He kept quiet. And when I tried to tell him a third time, to ask him a third time whether he was willing to be Joshua, he told me, usiamshe walalao au utaamka wewe mwenyewe. So he warned me against raising these questions about Joshua. But as it turned out, of course, Moi never became Joshua. He probably was more of Korah than Joshua, which was very sad because Moi had started off well with a lot of popular rhetoric. And I just wished that he could do what Kenyatta had failed to do. But of course, as time went by, Moi became even more brutal than he had started. So let me say that Moi's bad leadership was not just the legacy of Moi's rule. It has also been the legacy of those people who have been in power recently. Let me say during Moi's rule, even State House was itself not, it shocked me that it was never run as a government office. I remember once I visited State House, Nairobi, and after a long talk, which we had between myself, Moi, Nyachai, and Kiereini, after we had concluded, first of all, we had a funny moment when Moi asked me what people thought Jonjo was. And I told him that people thought he was the most powerful person that was in Kenya, probably even more powerful than the president, because if he wanted you dead, you would be dead. If he wanted you in jail, you would be in jail, whether you had committed a crime or not. And Moi laughed so hard that he went on his knees. And I couldn't understand what was so funny to make him laugh as hard as he had. Later, I discovered that in a true Machiavellian fashion, he had put Jonjo into a trap in which Jonjo had become the recipient of all the blame for all the bad things that were happening in the country. And this, he had been put into this particular situation by Moi because he wanted to be able to use that reputation, bad reputation, to get rid of him. In any case, before we finished our meeting, Moi went looking into briefcases that lined the entire 4 walls of that room. And as he was opening one briefcase after the other, I saw they were all stacked with money, bundles of money. And when he was going from one to the other, he was looking for the right bundle to throw at me. He started with 5,000, and it was not the one that he wanted, then 10, then 15, and he came to 20, and he took the bundle and he threw it at me. Of course, I couldn't have said no to it, otherwise I would have suffered consequences. So I took it, but was left asking whether so much money, that much money that I saw, was Moi's private money, or was it state money that he had taken from Treasury to distribute to people? And I thought that it was money from probably it was money from the state, that Moi was using to distribute, to buy political support from people who visited him or who were invited to State House. And so I was rather disappointed by the fact that there seemed to be no line between what was private to Moi and what belonged to the government. It is like what belonged to the government was Moi's, and what was Moi's was also government. They were the same. They were the same. They were one and the same thing, which actually made me sad to move rather fast. I later also believed that corruption was part of Moi's legacy, because of course there was so much land being stolen from the state to be given to people. And people were also making money through corrupt means. Goldenberg is good evidence, and it was followed by Anglo leasing and so forth. I think corruption has continued to thrive because not only because it is done, but also because it is protected. And I remember when I was a member of the Public Accounts Committee, which investigates corruption in the state. Moi made sure that I was thrown out of the committee because he argued that I was going to victimize civil servants who had made money the way they had made it. So he asked me to retire from the committee, which I refused. I said I had been elected and I could only be thrown out through another election by MPs. He said he was going to dissolve the committee. I dared him to dissolve it. But later, members of the committee was pressured into voting me out, all in protection of corruption. The other legacy I believe needs to be looked at is the legacy of the system that we have. That we have had a very brutal capitalist system that has been responsible for all the corruption and poverty that we have in the country. And these days I hear people saying that the bottom-up system is the remedy for that capitalism, or the trickle-down system. But personally, I believe that these untested bottom-up and trickle-down systems, though they have not been part of the legacy, if they were implemented, they would probably become the same thing, and they may not be able to resolve our problems as they exist. Personally, I believe that to solve our economic problems, we need the system of social democracy, because I have been to where it is practiced, and I can say that it works, and that is in Scandinavia. I saw heaven on earth. I was sad that I wanted to return to Kenya before I died, but I thought it was a good place to die, in the sense that you enjoyed everything that you deserve as a human being. In any case, anyway, what I'm trying to say, if anybody is genuine about getting rid of corruption, social democracy is there, is available, and it can be practiced with a lot of success, I believe. The other legacy is the fall of national unity, orchestrated by the leadership, and is substituted with the rise of ethnic unity. Personally, I believe that negative ethnicity is an ideology that was promoted a lot by Moi during the days when he was determined to stop the change of the change of the system to bring about multi-party democracy. And he did not only orchestrate ethnic unity to be used against national unity, but he also showed us what he meant by negative ethnicity through the ethnic clashes that we had in places like Moro and elsewhere. So in short, let me say that it's unfortunate that Moi remained unrepentant throughout the time that he was in power. I remember I did ask him, I had a lunch, he invited me to a lunch in Kabarak, and I took the opportunity to ask him whether his government having committed so much crime, whether they were now willing to apologize to Kenyans for what they did. And Moi, for some strange reason, refused to answer my question. He just looked at me, and then I pressed on. I reminded him that although after him, governments had not been perfect, but they had done slightly better than he had. And why could he not apologize for himself and Kenyatta, on whose behalf he seems to have been running the system as he did? But he completely refused, just like Jonjo, whom I had also met and challenged over the way they had run the government. But Jonjo told me that he thinks that if things had gone wrong in Kenya, the people to be blamed were not the government, but the people who are destabilizing the government and making it difficult to operate. So he too said he remained unrepentant. I have wished somebody can convince him to agree that there have been mistakes made in the past, and these mistakes need to be corrected. So let me stop at that. And blame a lot of our problems today to what had happened in the past, without without sounding that the system after Moi were perfect, because they were not perfect. In fact, they continue to do the same thing, and that's why we are calling them those mistakes legacies of Moi. I agree entirely that we need to look at the system afresh. In fact, the campaign should never have stopped, because atrocities did not stop, they continued to happen. Although, of course, there was a time when, or in recent times, atrocities are being directed against people who are from the lower classes, and therefore are not focused. Their elimination or their problems are not focused on by the media, and therefore they don't seem to be serious or even allowed. But I believe that our system has not changed, and as long as it has not changed, Moi's legacies will continue to happen under other regimes. Thank you. I'm done.
Yes. Thank you so much, Wishimiwa, for that elaborate explanation of what experiences you went through and your relationship with Moi, and what that meant to the current leadership of this country. And the fact that you have mentioned, and it's key for us to take note of that and highlight it as we move to the next election, is that legacies are shared from one leader to the other. So what that means to us is that we shouldn't expect too much, every time we want to see change, probably we need to think about who will bring change to our nation. Because your experience is with Kibaki, your experience with Moi is no different. Meaning every time there's need and urge as a nation for someone to take us to Canaan, we are yet to get the right person to take this country to Canaan. I want to appreciate every person who joined this conversation, and just to indicate that it is a show that it is an important conversation for this country, and the need for us to change and to see what is best for us. Probably the how is what we want to define as we move. Also appreciate and acknowledge the fact that we have been joined by victims of Moi's regime. Allow me to mention a few by their names. We have Winnie Mukaru and Mom, Mrs. Mukaru Nganga, Washira Waheire, Ongele Opala, Nelson Akahukwa, Joroge Muigai of X-82 Air Force, among many others who are here. We appreciate your joining, and also just to affirm that this is not to awaken the wounds, but to keep healing them as we discuss these issues. They are very important for us. To invite another key panelist is Lee. Is Lee around, probably? I'm told we have a recording of Lee's presentation. Maybe we can run it.
We have a presentation of Lee, but we will play it later. Thank you.
Say that again.
We have a presentation from Lee, but we will play it later. We are still having some technical challenges.
All right, no problem. Thank you so much. Allow me then to invite a lady whose understanding of Moi's era is evidence from what she does today. Muthoni Kamau is an activist and an ardent supporter of human rights. She is currently running a course on human rights within the various parts of this country. I think our issues around human rights violations of the elderly in Wajir, Kilifi, in many parts of this country, supporting them to realize that human rights is beyond young adults, but also even as an old adult, you still have your human rights. There's need for us to protect those rights beyond, up until when you are out of this world. So karibu sana Muthoni, please take us through your experiences.
Thank you so much, Soila, and hello everyone. It's nice to see Mheshimiwa Koigi and all of us. I agree with all the sentiments that have been given by Davis, by George, and Koigi, that there's no way we can evaluate Moi's legacy without looking at the Kenyatta One regime. And indeed, when you look at the Kenyatta One regime, we also have to connect the thread to the colonial legacy. I experienced Moi at a very early age because I was brought up in Molo, so I'm a victim of the initial clashes that were dubbed tribal clashes or land clashes, but really they were tribal clashes, well orchestrated. The people who were killing and maiming were well-trained people, only that they were not in uniform. And then I joined the university, and somehow I became an activist fighting for academic freedoms, and of course, my very first time to take in tear gas and rungus was at the university. And at the same time, at the university, I joined, before I even became a student leader, I was part of the founding members of the Release Political Prisoners that was pushing for the release of the detained people who had been detained at the pleasure of Moi. And so we joined the mothers of the political prisoners, and we organized around them and with them to push for the release of those people who had been detained. And we did a lot of activism around that. The one legacy that has not been mentioned so far is a legacy of fear, instilling fear in people. As we went around collecting information about the people we were fighting for, we realized how much government had instilled fear in their families, to the extent that they had banned anything or photographs, anything that would connect them with their person who was in detention. It was a bit hard to get information around some of the detainees because the families had been scared completely that they didn't want even to be connected with these people. If you project that to the rest of society, you can almost see how very few people are able to even stand up for their own rights. I think this is a legacy that started with colonialism. Kenyatta took it up and perfected it, and Moi just strengthened the same. That for you to be able to suppress people and to make people sing to your tune, you just use violence and instill a lot of fear. The hanging of portraits in people's buildings and wherever is psychologically is like telling you this person is listening to any and every conversation that is going on, and that is really what to me has made the push for better leadership, better governance, service to the people very, very hard. That the people themselves are so scared to stand for their own rights. So really, it is very true. We cannot evaluate Moi's legacy without looking at the Kenyatta legacy and the colonial legacy before him. And as David said, Moi promised atafuata nyayo, and he really didn't disappoint. In fact, he went beyond. Jomo Kenyatta killed, maimed, detained his critics, including his own close friends, those he did not differ with ideologically. But if they ever showed some signs of opposing him on anything, then they had to go. They had to be eliminated. And Moi did exactly that. They perfected tribalism. When it came to people questioning their leadership, it didn't matter what tribe, including their own ethnic related people. But to the common people, they projected as if the problem was the other community and not their policies and not their actions and not their use of fear and violence against any critic of what they were doing. To me, part of the legacy of Moi has to be seen in terms of privatizing most and critical social services. And I think that's the problem we are facing now. Of course, he's not the one who started, but he perfected. And that is what we have seen that has brought the country almost down to its knees. That very essential services like education, like health, are almost completely in the private hands. It is very difficult to change this country unless we change this scenario where people cannot get services in public institutions, that you have to go private for you to get health care, that you have to go private for you to get a good education for your child. And that privatizing also almost, hand in hand with corruption, has crippled civil service completely. When civil servants have been deployed to do political work, and that is what we are also seeing with Moi's students or children, as Koigi called them, the Uhuru Kenyatas and the Rutos and those in government now, they are deploying their civil servants, the civil servants they have employed to do the political bidding. That has to change. If we have to change governance in this country, that really has to change. One big problem is that politicians in this country are also business people. And so most of the decisions, the policies that they enact are to effectively benefit them economically. And that has been a part of the legacy of the past governments, including Moi. And if we do not turn that around, then this will not be a country in another 10 years. If the trajectory remains that way, then this may not be a country worth calling a country. In line with that privatization and the corruption involved, again, it has been mentioned here about Goldenberg. But the biggest corruption is in the politics of privatizing public goods and using public land, public parastatals, public goods to bribe or to sort of give reward, if you could use that way, to reward political cronies. And that's why it has been very, very hard to fight corruption, because Moi used our resources, the taxes, and public land to build people around him, so that he can be able to perfect his leadership. So anyone who supports him, they are rewarded by being given some school land, some forest, something. And that also extended to the common people, where people are ignorant of the fact that it is their right to have land, or to have good education, or to have the things that they desire, and not as tokenism, or given because they have supported their person, a tribal leader who is in support of the person in State House. And that connection is what makes it very sad for me, that when you try to reason with people, that we have to connect our daily suffering to the kind of governance that the people they put in government render to us, it becomes very hard. There doesn't seem to be that that connection. People believe that they get good roads because their person is in government, not because they pay taxes, and not because legally they should be having those good roads. That is something that Moi actually, looking back at the deliberate privatization of public goods and services, that is something that really he perfected, and his children have picked up and are continuing to use, such that it is almost given that come electioneering, the person who gives the biggest lies about the roads and whatever gets the votes. And people don't stop to think, where will this person get the money from? Is it not our money? And this is how you see, just the way it was demanded to have portraits of these people on your walls, in your businesses, as if you share rent with these people. When an MCA or an MP is running a project, not using his own private money, but using CDF, which is tax money, they have to put a big billboard there that this thing was done by Mheshimiwa this and the other. It is a psychological warfare that we really need to find ways, practical ways of fighting amongst the people. We fought for the Constitution, but to me, that Constitution is the hardware. We have failed to enact or do serious civic education that is going to create the software that we need to be able to or to have people live and believe in that Constitution and live constitutionalism. The other point I wanted to strengthen, which has been said, is about the issue of corruption. We look at the major things that happened during Moi's time, but we need to look at the what you could call, they didn't take the limelight like Goldenberg did, or later in Kibaki's time, the Anglo-Leasing. But there seems to be a policy somewhere, which was started by Moi, that you don't pay the police, a living wage, but you unleash the police on the people so that they can look for payment for themselves. And that has set a very bad trajectory of privatizing even security. So the state does not only unleash terror on citizens who are organizing or questioning, but even ordinary citizens. When the police stops you and demands for this ID or the other, where are you going, where are you coming from, they've already criminalized you. And part of that has silently happened. For example, when you do when you study abroad and come back home, you have to pay some money to the Commission for Higher Education for your degree to be accepted in Kenya. You have to pay some money. When you are looking for a job, or in some countries, actually, when you're applying for a visa or that, you have to, they demand for this police, what do they call it? Police something. I've never gone for it, but they demand for that, a police certificate of good conduct. Now, when you have to be cleared by the police that you are a good citizen, what does that mean? That you are not a citizen until your government says you are a citizen. You don't have a right to be who you are until some agency, government agency, says that you're good to go. You are criminalized just for being Kenyan, that you have to present yourself to them and they have to run your fingerprints and then they can give you some certificate that qualifies you to now have your right, the right that you want to seek, the right to employment, the right to get a passport or get a visa. It is very sad, and that's what I'm in my view, I'm saying the country was privatized, has been privatized slowly but surely from Moi's time, all this time, small chunk by small chunk. We focus on the big things, but the little things that are happening and that are affecting the majority of the people, we have not been able to focus on them. Which means for us to undo Moism, we have to refocus our attention from the political hard knuckle of fighting for who is going to be in State House and that, and direct that to the people. That's what I call working on the software, because we did 20 years or even more than, if you connect from the days of DTM or Kenya and fighting for Constitution 2010, and thereafter these 10 years of trying to live and enact Constitution 2010. We've done a lot, and we have covered, credit to us, we have covered some ground, good ground, but we still don't have the people. Why? Because we have done it for the people. Now we need to do it with the people. Because at the end of the day, these are the people who vote in, the same people that we are fighting against. At the end of the day, these voters are the people we are fighting for. And throughout my activism, it has dawned on me that I cannot liberate you. I cannot liberate the other person. I can only liberate myself. But because majority of us are living that suppression, then if I'm conscious, the only way I can change the narrative, the only way I can change the situation for myself is to come to you. We reason together, we ask ourselves, because we are the ones wearing the shoe, where and how is this shoe pinching us, and how can we change it? That will lead to us changing the software. We have dealt with the hardware, and even recently we've been able to defend that hardware being torn down again. But we need to work on the software. It saddens me so much to see crowds of people following Ruto. And I'm like, what is happening? What did I do with my youth that this is happening in the country that I gave my youth to fight for? But then I'm not quick to blame the victim, because I take these people to be the victims. But the question is, what can I do if I'm to truly make a dent to Moi's legacy, which is the same one that is ruling us? What can I do? I can only focus on those people one by one, 10 by 10 focused group discussions until we create that critical mass that can now change things. When I read the concept that I was sent last night by Malombe, it says there that part of Moi's legacy was to empower women, and I was like, really? Then maybe I'm not one of those women who were empowered by Moi. However, if creating maendeleo ya wanawake, which is not him who created, is empowering women, then unfortunately what he later did and what has gone on to happen to date is that these institutions, starting as well-meaning, end up being used politically to suppress the very people they are supposed to be helping, empowering. Maendeleo ya wanawake, as we all know, has a national reach. It would be and was once a very powerful organization. but it became the women league of KANU, and became like KANU Maendeleo ya Wanawake. And so to that extent, it waters down. And indeed, when you look at the private lives of some of these dictators, you realize how, sorry?
You have 0 minutes, so I would request that you.
Sure, I'm actually saying the last sentence. You realize that saying Moi in the same sentence with empowering women is cannot go. It is simply a question of using women, using youth, YK92, for them to perfect their acting in power. And so maybe the only sweet part of Moi's legacy that I know is kukunywa maziwa ya Nyayo. But then that maziwa ya Nyayo was at the expense of killing the farmers, the milk farmers, and impoverishing them. And but you know, we all have different experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muthoni, for that very elaborate presentation from your end, your history, and what you think really is deterring us from being a country that is self-independent. I want to pick a few issues that have been alluded by our speakers. One of the key things that you will really relate with Moi's legacy is tokenism. The issue of tokenism really was born and and bred during Moi's era. The issue of privatization of social services, the issue of ethnic balkanization, and failure of education, among many other issues that have come out clearly as the things that really are affecting us up to now, when you're still struggling to be an independent economic hub that can comfortably take care of its citizens. An issue that we must also take into account when we are going to our 2022 elections, that do we really have the right leadership that is currently fronting itself? What best can we do to change that narrative? I want to quickly, because of time, to invite one of our key speakers. It's a lady coming after a lady. Her name is Jerotich Sei, an active citizen of Kenya and a women rights defender who is very popularly known for her campaign Switch Off KPLC, a campaign that has been championing the rights of consumers of Kenya Power and Lightning Company. And also in the recent days during the COVID-19, she was able to run a humanity campaign, a campaign that saw benefited vulnerable communities with something to eat when life was very difficult. Welcome, Jerotich. Give us your perspectives on Moi's legacy.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, thanks very much. Thank you for this invitation to join all of you on this particular day. You know, when I saw the topics and where we were going with these discussions, I thought perhaps actually more appropriate would have been either my mother or father, Ambassador Tabitha Sei or retired Major John Sei, who are the contemporaries of Mheshimiwa Wamwere and who lived through the Moi days and really experienced what it meant. I'd like to first of all start off by saying that Moi's legacy is alive and well, because Moi went nowhere. Jomo Kenyatta went nowhere. From Jomo Kenyatta, Moi followed in his footsteps. We've just seen a passing of the baton. And to agree with the speakers who came before me, nothing has changed ultimately because nothing has changed. And I think the big question always in my mind is, what will it take to get the population of this country to understand that this is their country, this is our country, this is my country. That's why I call myself an active citizen, not even necessarily an activist or whatever. I'm an active citizen. I live here, and so long as I live here, and this is my birthright, this is my inheritance, I will continue to speak up. And we need, like all of you who are participating here, and many that I know who are not on this particular webinar, we are doing what we can in our own way to continue to trigger a consciousness amongst Kenyan patriots, men and women and children and everybody out there who wants to see a better Kenya. But I think what would be important for me in honor or as homage to my parents is to start off, and some of you may know this story because they have told it as well, but for those of you who may not be familiar, it was way back in 1983, those days when we were busy drinking Nyayo milk in primary school. I must have been in standard 3 or standard 4 at that time. And my mother tells the story that she came back from the shamba late afternoon and found my father in full dress uniform, military dress, complete, very formal. And he was walking around the compound. We lived in Eldoret in those days. And where he was a military man, and where he was tasked with the establishment of 9KR up in Eldoret. And she found him walking around the compound, carrying my youngest sister, who for context reasons is now in her 40s already. So that was quite a while ago. And he looked at her and her heart sank, and he said, "It's gone. My career is gone." And what happened, and the backstory to this, is my mother, from her days in high school and her years in Makerere, and her being an educationalist and a teacher, and also a wife and a mother, at some point in the late 1970s, she looked at the state of the area where she was married into, which is Keio South, and she said it is impossible that people should live in such poverty, such abject poverty, and so underdeveloped. And yet there is a very powerful member of parliament who was the late Nicholas Biwott. And that's when she said, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. And she began to work with the community. I think she was with World Vision doing some volunteer work, etc., etc. And at some point she said, not only am I going to keep working with the community, but I'm going to run for elective office. And this was the beginning of the problems that my parents faced, because although everyone wants to say, oh, Kalenjins all benefited under Moi, this was not the case. And the late great Bishop Muge would have said the same. And the few Kalenjins that stood up at a time when the single party state was in full effect really understood the terror and the havoc that could be wreaked on their lives by virtue of daring to step outside the box and challenge the apparent supreme leader. Forget about Ayatollah. I mean, Moi was the supreme leader of the Republic of Kenya at that point. And so when my mom started engaging in elective politics, it happened that they thought the only way to quash her and to silence her was to go through my father, Major Sei. And they summoned him repeatedly and said, hey, get your wife out of politics. What is she doing? Why is she here? Who does she think she is? Nicholas Biwott is a member of parliament. He's a powerful minister. He's going nowhere. And my father's response to that was, my wife is over the age of 18. She has a legitimate agenda. I support it. And she can do what she needs to do. And I will not influence, coerce, or push her and make her stop. And subsequently, I think there were some trumped up charges that were landed on my father, and he had the option to either face a court martial or be dishonorably discharged from the military. And that afternoon must have been August, July or August 1983, he had been summoned to Nairobi, to Ulinzi, and he was dishonorably discharged by General Sawe, who was then in charge. And that began that entrenched the commitment, my parents' commitment to fight for a better Kenya. And I remember at that moment, the house that we lived in Eldoret was under the diocese it was owned by the Anglican Church, and the military was renting that property from the Anglican Church. And the head of the Anglican Church at that point in time was the late Bishop Muge. That evening, he promptly cancelled the lease that the military had, and he allowed my parents to spend a few more months there. And they were all very good friends, and they all knew what type of dangers they faced by virtue of being Kalenjins who stood up against the Moi regime. And this is how I grew up. We grew up in a space where being Kalenjin was not a blessing. It was not even a privilege. It was something that had us ostracized and pushed aside, and many Kalenjins, including relatives, were afraid to associate with us because they did not want to be victimized. And Moi's control and stranglehold of the country was complete, and he expected absolute loyalty and discipline, especially from within his ranks, which are the people from his tribe. And this is how tribe is weaponized by our political leaders. And they create this space where, instead of saying everybody is a Kenyan citizen in their own right, your ethnicity is not something you applied for. Your ethnicity is not a lottery. You're just born. I was born a Kalenjin. My parents were born Kalenjin. And they continued to fight all the way through the repeal of Section 2A, and stayed active in public life, in leadership. And I think my mother was eventually nominated to Parliament, ended up also in the diplomatic service under Kibaki's regime. But my father, who I'm very close to, and we talk quite regularly, and we were even on opposite sides of the equation during the Linda Katiba campaign when he was a member of the BBI task force. And we had lots of conversations, and I said to my father, I said, you know what you suffered in the hands of Moi's regime. You know, nothing has changed. I know you believe we are trying to build bridges, or they're trying to build bridges, but this is not the case. And as we debated, and he went back and thought about his life and the truncation of his career at the age of 40, and what do? You have a young family, you have to get on with your life. And he went into conflict prevention work and continues to work in this realm. And he's elderly now, but the state still owes him an apology for those trumped up charges and the dishonorable discharge. And this is something that if I could fight for and ensure that in his lifetime he sees that apology come. But as I said, the legacy of Moi is alive and well. Nothing has changed in Kenya. So for me, when I was thinking about what do we say about the legacy of Moi, we can tell stories. Those of us who lived in that time, who drank Nyayo milk, who were forced to live under the endless sycophantic songs that we sang. I sang them in primary school and high school, and we just didn't think twice about it. We also saw the apparent development that he was bringing, gabions and tree planting and all kinds of things. And we were in this web, this illusion and delusion that very few people were able to see through. And those who saw through it and rose up against it were punished severely. Detention, torture, murder, a loss of livelihoods, expulsion from the country, as having to be in exile like Honorable Koigi. And my message to this particular generation, because we are now the dinosaurs, we are not, I'm in my late 40s. Most of us, even who are speaking here, need to understand that the vast majority of the population of this country is young, and we don't want to just tell them stories for story's sake. History is important. It is important that they understand what happened. But I think the message, as I wind up, that I want to pass on is that there should be an eternal vigilance, a fearlessness, a commitment to always do what is right, no matter what. We are not telling these stories so that you feel sorry for my parents or feel sorry for those of us who suffered under Moi's draconian regime, cruel, heartless regime that was cloaked in love and kindness and building schools and loving children and doing all of these things. But it is not for sympathy or for pity, but to understand that the battle is far from over. that I want to encourage all young people who are living under the yoke of corruption, of injustice, of disenfranchisement, of an inability to have a correct education, access to livelihoods, to understand that this is still in their power to rise up against the despots, against the barons, against everyone who seeks to destroy Kenya for my children, my grandchildren, and for future generations. So it is to infuse a sense of courage and to say, rise up, do not be afraid. If there were those who rose up during the dark and dangerous days of Moi, then really what should we fear? And people often ask, oh, Cherotich, you say all these things, aren't you afraid? I said, I fear the Almighty only, and I'm willing to speak the truth as I understand it, because I have understood and I'm committed to my ownership of this country, not as a Kalenjin, but as a patriot, as a mother, as somebody who wants my children and my grandchildren to enjoy a better future, a better life than the one we're currently living. So mine is a word of encouragement to the next generation, not just to get paralyzed by our stories and what we went through, but to be infused with an enthusiasm and a commitment to continue to work towards breaking the evil legacies that continue to plague us in this country today, and be fearless, always fearless, be active, speak up, even if you're the only one. So that's my message, and I thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
Wow, thank you very much, Cherotich, for those perspectives and the need to just look at Kenya as a country and not ourselves as beneficiaries of our ethnic background. Listening to you clearly, it was not rosy after all. Maybe some of us and many others who grew during Moi's era in the 90s would have probably envied to be a Kalenjin then, because it felt like everything rosy was coming from that end. Everything good was for them then. We now realize that it wasn't. It is as Kenyans, and we must all be alive to that fact that we only vote as ethnics, but when it comes to suffering, we all suffer the same problems. We have no reason not to think it, and reason of ways we can be able to correct that and have ourselves a good Kenya, a Kenya for all, a Kenya that will not look at our ethnic background, but most importantly, look at what we need for our country and for our generations to come. Thank you very much. We have our I think audio for one of the speakers, one of the panelists who was supposed to also be here online, but then he didn't manage. Then we can be able to play his perspectives on a video, which we can still be able to interact with and continue chatting, continue bringing Q&As. I will request all the panelists to go to the section of Q&A, answer all the questions possible, so that we are also making sure that all these issues are addressed as we move on. We can also be able to engage at the chat area, because there are many insights coming up from the participants here, showing the clear understanding of the Moi's legacy. Indeed, it wasn't rosy. It wasn't the best thing for all of us. So allow me to invite my colleagues to share the video of one Lee Kinyanjui to play so that we can engage with. Thank you. Or Linjiru, sorry, Linjiru.
The substance and the health in each. Different people.
Bernard, if you can kindly increase volume, we can't hear. Bernard, you might need to check your video again. It's not, we can't hear anything.
How did people understand war? Who informed them? It is the press. Who controlled the press? Which one? That is our
There's a challenge with the video, but we will upload it and then share the link after during the chat.
Okay, okay, please do, because then we can't hear anything at the moment. Maybe so that we can proceed. Allow us to go to the next panelist. Just to check on whether we have our next and almost a final panelist, Hassan Omar. He was going to be a bit late, so I just want to confirm whether he joined us.
Well, let's proceed with the rest. He's too elder, but he's keen to joining us.
Okay, so then we can, I think we can directly now go to the victims who would wish to share their experiences with us here. I can start with, allow me to get their names correctly. Winnie Mukaro, please, if she can hear us, please, the coordinators kindly give her a chance to speak. Yes, Winnie, can you hear us? Great. Kindly unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Asante Sana Irene. My name is Winnie Njoki Mukaro. And my mom had a hard time logging in. She's on the phone. I'm filming with WhatsApp, so she can hear what we are saying. So I'm here to represent my mom and my family. My father, Mukaro Nganga, who died, as you know, many years ago. He was one of the victims of Moi's regime. But today we are here also to talk about my mother, where she went through when my father was detained and tortured. I don't need to go through the torture period because everybody knows there was torture that my father underwent. And actually, we have won a case. So that is good that we were recognized and his case was recognized. And my mother was the one representing his case as a living witness. My mom and other women, as you know, they suffered a lot because when my father was in detention, my father didn't even get a job, so he couldn't even support his family. So it was my mom who had to support the family. And we had a very difficult time because when the CID were coming to the house, searching the house in the middle of the night, people forget also what the kids went through as children. And we are also the victim of this. So when we were invited to share our story, I know we don't have a lot of time left, but we just wanted to say, also the children, they suffer. And even my brother, the youngest brother, was actually diagnosed with the post-traumatic stress. And because of this, coming to exile, living in a country which was strange to us, learning a new language, he underwent depression and he even died. So my father didn't find the justice, or he didn't get the justice he needed. And my brother also, who said, we need to be recognized. What we are going through or what we went through need to be recognized. We are so happy that we got a judgment, and we were awarded 15 million, but it wasn't about the award, because the torture my father went through and what our family suffered, it can never be compensated in any way. So what was important for us actually is to get an apology before Moi died, so we can get a closure for our family. But we never got that apology. You know, the things we went through, thank God our children, my mom's grandchildren, my father's grandchildren, the 6 of them, they will never need to go to court to fight for their grandfather. But as children, we got the closure when we got the judgment. What about us telling the stories? Because we don't want this to ever happen again, but I hear that it's still happening. We came, when we got the chance to fight for this case, people didn't want to hear. So they were taking us to 2 different courts. So we were coming to Kenya 2-3 times a year, which is also difficult for us for over 10 years. My father took his case to court in 1987, and we won this case in 2018. And even then, it's still difficult for us to come there to fight for this award. We want my mom. She's a pensioner. She's over 70. We want also her to enjoy the fruits of this, that my father also was trying to fight for our family. But what we want to, our message and my mom's message is about how the families and other families, the women and the children, they should be recognized. And we are so happy we got a chance to participate in this. And us still in the diaspora, we also have a voice. And we hope that when we are doing this work, don't forget about us. Because today we are talking about also democratization. That's what my father was fighting for multipartyism. But we also have the fruits of growing in these countries. We can also work together. We have tools that we have seen that have worked in these countries. And how can we help with these tools? Like Muthoni was saying, it's so hard when you go to the community. How are we going to get the people to understand? I actually started a project in a couple of years ago, and that project is called Building Democracy from Below, using study circles or dialogue circles for community change, as we call them. Because in Sweden, over 100 years ago, they didn't have the democracy they have here, but they went to the grassroots, and that's how it was. That's why their democracy is so successful. The people in the grassroots need to join together in this fight. And I know people don't want to hear our story because it's a very difficult story, but it's actually the truth, and it's what we have suffered, and it's what we went through. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Winnie, for that. And we continue praying that people, the victims of atrocities and human rights violations continue healing, continue speaking about these issues, because as we speak, our children also get to understand what really it meant to have these leaderships in place and what it has costed for liberation, if we will ever get liberated as a country. So allow me to invite Muigai, 3 minutes, to also give his perspectives and his experiences. Muigai Njoroge.
Thank you very much, panelists. And I want to say today's session was a great session. Most of the things have been said. And are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I want to start by saying I wish this country can move away from getting top leaders from the people who have been in the system. What I'm trying to say is that there was Kenyatta, then there was Moi, then Kibaki, then Uhuru, all people. I wish we can have new people. We don't have a shortage of people. We have Jerotich, we have Mr. Kigoro, we have many people who can actually lead this country, because that is what has been ailing us. So I'm going to divide my quick remarks in 3 sections, and I've just dealt with the first one. And then I'm going to about our suffering. Honorable Koigwa Mwere, if he's still on, he touched on a very, very sensitive subject, and that is about Moi. Moi was a schemer. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because he talked about how Moi asked him about who Jonjo was and what position was. Little did Mr. Koigi know that there was a plan to kick out Moi. Similarly, there was a plan to remove the Kikuyus from the Kenya Air Force, where I used to serve. And Moi went to great lengths to make sure that he ignored all the advice, the intelligence advice, to have the coup attempt go on so that he could remove the Kikuyus who are there by merit. In fact, from number 1 to number 7 were all Kikuyus. Well, it happened. What happened is that we suffered in the process, and I can also only say that Moi's legacy is that of oppression and conspiracy and trickery. And you know, when many people talk about Moi, they really don't know who the person is. He's a person who would talk, laugh with you, and he's holding a sword at the back. Many people, and Mr. Koigi has actually alluded to that, had suffered through that. What we need to do as Kenyans is to make sure that we get away with the issue of tokenism. This is going to save us. Madam Muthoni Kamau talked about it, and I'm very happy about today's panelists. And you know, the people who have gone through the suffering most people are talking about know the ruthlessness of the society, of the state operatives. They're actually people on the streets, but when alone with them, they are not human beings. The prison warders, people do not know who really those people are. We need to change. And I'm glad something has been done, a bit little, but we need to actually make our Kenyan society open, like Mr. Koigi had talked about, the country he used to live in. So I went up there, and I also mentioned that most of the people who got trapped out in 1982 were not aware of what was going on. They didn't even participate. In fact, we have several judgments in favor of the people, because various people have explained to courts what happened. And actually, had it been not for the people, ex-Air Force specialists, this country would have been taken to the dogs. They stopped the bombing. They made sure that all the bombs that were arranged to explode did not explode, and they did not participate. So they are yet to get justice, but one day I hope they will. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and may we have these sessions regularly. Thank you very much, Mr. Davis Malombe. You opened up the session actually in a great summary. I thank you all, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Muigai, for that. And the need for us to change as a country. That is a call that has been made by everyone in this, all the panelists in this discussion today. Francis Opala is our last panelist whom we want to have for 3 minutes to just give us his own experiences. Oh, then we can close with Wachira Waheire. Karibu, Francis.
Thank you very much, Soila, and thank you very much to all the panelists. A lot of things have been said, which I do not want to repeat, probably let me just mention that I'm one of those who are jailed by Moi when I was a student at Kenyatta University after the August coup, which was, I would say, a critical moment in our history because it has also brought a lot of changes, and it said that was the turning point to Moi's dictatorship. We spent a variety of years from we're given 6 to 10 years. Some of us have died ever since. Some of us are critically ill. And of course, some of us joined the system, got their own appointments, some appointments not within the system. But the impact or the consequences of Moi's dictatorships is not over yet. As you have said, we have got a system which is rigged so that Moi's legacy is perpetuated from Moi to even to Kenyatta up to the present, and even to those who are aspiring at the process, they have got in one way or the other worked with Moi, and we are not very sure whether they are going to change, whether they are seeing things the way we would like it to be. And that makes me sometimes wonder whether democracy is good, because when they emphasize democracy, democracy gives these people a weapon because they have got the money, they have got the media, they have got ways of convincing people that whatever has been done was good. So we struggle with them for space so that we can be heard, but somehow they still have an upper hand. And it just, to me, thinks that I think we should continue our way. Maybe at one particular point in time, we'll be able to let the masses see, we'll reach a critical point where they can see the lies that they are being told. I don't have much to say. I did not meditate on this forum, but I really appreciate that I've taken part in it. I just got informed about 1 hour before it started that there's something on. And this conversation, I hope we shall continue with it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Opala, for your experiences and sharing them out with us. It's nice to always hear from even the victims, and that really it was not the best experience that they ever got. I want to invite our final panelist, who is Wachira. Wachira is also a victim during Moi's era. Kindly share your experiences with us.
Good afternoon, all of you. My name is Wachira Waheire, and I don't want to talk much because most of what I've said, the experiences that I've gone through, they've actually been mentioned by most of the previous speakers. What I need to say in terms of, I want to point out something which was mentioned by George, that there's something which is very important called memory. And you find that societies that there's a linkage always between the past, the present, and the future. So I also want to agree that this question of Moi's legacy, it has also been mentioned that he was actually following Nyayo, following the legacy of somebody else, and Tutu is actually promised he exactly went to do that. The kind of leaders that we have today are leaders who have actually honed their political skills under KANU, and we've always seen demonstrated efforts of these countries wanting to take us back to the dark days, in terms of like not following or believing in a constitutional framework, so they don't pay allegiance to our constitution. They don't pay allegiance to the rule of law. So we find that what happens most of the time is that there's that continuity, and going ahead, because we had bad leadership, because the summary by Koigi actually captured it all. in terms of the legacies that are bad, which are actually apply to during the colonial times. We had a dictatorial kind of colonial structure. We had bad leadership, we had corruption, we had brutal capitalist system. All these things, it's like in a continuum. And it's very likely that tomorrow, the kind of leadership, there's nothing which is going to change. Jerotich said it hasn't changed. There's like no likelihood it's going to change tomorrow unless we get a new, it's like a blood transfusion of this country, whereby in terms of political leadership, that we find completely new political leaders who are able to actually cut that umbilical cord with their past. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of memory. We have a historical memory that, because there will always be a contest between the memory of the leaders and the memory, the true national memory. So there will always be that contest. And it is actually for us to keep engaged in doing memorial initiatives that actually are geared towards unpacking the lies of actually what has been told. Because I had somebody saying here about how Moi was known for kupenda wanawake na watoto na love, peace and unity, but that was a facade which was actually to hide his true personality, and that's why people actually inculcated with those patriotic songs, that kind of thing. But you see, that was the hallmarks of a good dictatorship. And now, despite the fact that we have a strong constitution, we still have situations whereby the leaders in power right now, they don't actually obey the constitution, they don't obey the laws. There are so many laws that are passed, and then the court says they are unconstitutional, but they are not changed. The leaders don't see that as anything important. So with those few remarks, I want to thank the organizers of this particular conversation. I think it's a conversation that needs to keep on recurring like somebody else. Let's talk to more people. Let's open up this space whereby as we head towards the election, we are able to unpack some of the, because the moment we start talking about legacy, we will be now looking at our history, and we will be able to know from where we are coming, where we are, and where we are going. So with those few remarks, thank you so much for listening to me, and God bless you all. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you so much, Wachira Wahire, for closing powerfully and saying that this is a discussion that we need not to have it just here and it closes, but also have it beyond, to continue having this conversation and let people understand what it means and the leadership that we have had before to inform what we want to have in our coming elections, and to guide us even when we are making these decisions of who the leaders we want to have. The issue of that has been raised by, I think, Paul, that footsteps of Moi's era are still present, much present, and that the panelists here have also confirmed that Moi's children are the leaders we have today who are fronting themselves for the 2022 elections. Do we still want to have that kind of leadership? Do we still want to have Moi even after his 24 years of leadership? Is it what we want to see as a country? Those are questions we need to continue asking ourselves to help us make informed decisions, because it is on us to make or to change this country. And we can only change this country when we decide to. But we can also decide to have the status quo continue, and we continue suffering as a country, because we suffer when it comes to suffering. There is no suffering that is directed to a particular nation. We all suffer as Kenyans without any form of favoritism or something. The initial thinking around this discussion was we needed to have the both extremes, that we have a legacy that is also looking at Moi as the alpha and omega. There are people who obviously have a lot of good things to say about Moi, but most importantly, most Kenyans suffered. And so that perspective is what we wanted to see. But now it seems like the positive side did not come out very clearly. probably we need to look at many other aspects where we can also look at that. How did these who, or is it lack of confidence that indeed it was not at the good side, but just because of who they were in the society, or it was the tokenism thing that played out well. Allow me to give George 1 minute or so to just give us the way forward. And then I invite Annette to close with a vote of thanks and also a way forward from the KHRC's perspective. Thanks.
I think for me is to really say that this has been a useful conversation. It's an important conversation, and it is also important that it is not a one-sided conversation, which is what the political leadership has tried to do with how Moi is remembered. They put on a massive bleeds when he died that projected him only one particular way. We saw from that Father Dolan, for example, the standard newspapers refused to run his column which was critical of Moi and which he wrote when Moi died, and which is how Father Dolan left the Standard. So there was a very, very orchestrated media activity to just project how Moi was remembered, or how Moi would be remembered. But the second thing I take from this is that Moi was an equal opportunity oppressor. He terrorized people from every part of the country. It's very easy to think that because he projected himself as a leader of and protecting the interests of the Kalenjin, there wouldn't be victims of his repression within that community. But the point that has been made here very powerful is that all parts of the country, wherever you came from, if you stood up to Moi, you got exactly the same consequences. Unfortunately, we were prevented from hearing because of the technical issues the perspectives of Lee Njiru, who served Moi for 44 years as his press secretary. He has a fairly different take on the Moi legacy, and that is a good thing also. And what I hoped would have happened is that there would then have been the balance that we need, but that balance has been more than provided for because of how the entire political establishment has projected Moi, especially at the time he died. So that good side of Moi is something that all of us are very familiar with from the media, but I'm hoping that availability of that content will be given to everybody so that there is a balanced conversation. And I would also like to say that I was involved in an attempt to, on behalf of the KHRC who have organized this, to reach out to the Moi family themselves, Senator Moi in particular, to ask that he participates in this conversation, because I believe personally that we don't have to agree about Moi, but we need to make the conversation respectful. Even when we criticize Moi, and I told him, your presence would make the conversation, it would elevate the quality of conversation, but it would also give you a chance to have your own view, to as a family, to hear what people say about your father as an important political actor. I think the unfortunate thing is that Senator Moi did not see value in this kind of conversation, and I'm hoping that in the days that come, even as he seeks higher political office and through KANU that Moi dominated, he will be able to see value in a public engagement about how Moi, his father, is remembered, because he's a disciple of that father himself. To see so many of the people who are the survivors, direct survivors of that repression in this call, it is heartwarming, because all the difficulties and the terror that all of you have faced at a personal level it's a humbling experience when you come across people like that in this conversation, because it could have ended, your lives could have ended, and your lives changed in very significant ways because of your encounter, and you are a source of courage to others and a source of inspiration that despite repression, people can survive and make some meaningful use of the rest of their lives. And I really wish you power, all of you who have been in this call and who come from that group of Kenyans. So then really for me is to thank Kenya Human Rights Commission for being very thoughtful about how it responds to public discourses. I hope we can do this again. I hope we did one on the Kenyatta family when I was at Kenya Human Rights Commission. It was very good also. And the Kenyatta family is the other significant family. I'm hoping that we can promise at the end of this call, she can promise us that they're going to pull one together and that it is going to be triggered, say, by the former Kenyatta Day, for example, in which case its turnaround time would be very quick. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sheila, also for moderating us so effectively.
Thank you very much, George, for that. And somebody, I just want, before I forget, that someone has requested that you can also share this recording with Honorable Gideon Moi so that he gets to understand what exactly was the conversation about, for him to be able to, independently judge. He becomes the judge at that point. Allow me to, because of time, to invite Annette as we close this conversation to give vote of thanks on behalf of Kenya Human Rights Commission. And as she comes, please allow me to confirm that we will share this recording with all the participants, plus also the recording that was to be played here of Lee Njiru, and his perspectives also will be clear at that point. We'll give you his recording for your own consumption. So thank you very much on my part. Karibu sana, Annette.
Thank you so much, Sheila, and the team as well. We have Ruth here. Ruth was the one that did the recording of Lee. I don't know whether we could give her, with your permission, the moderator, we could give her about 2 minutes to just give us a highlight of that. Then we do a vote of thanks.
Okay, that's okay. Karibu, Ruth.
Before Ruth speaks, also just to say how, just to recognize her very publicly for the heroism that went into that recording. I think the story will be told another day. But Ruth, thank you very, very much, because you moved mountains to get that recording done. Thank you.
Yeah. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, George, for that recognition. It was really one of those. So I met with Lee Njiru, and we had a conversation about the Moi legacy, and I really had hoped that you would be able to. You'd be able to, listen into his perspectives about what really constitutes Moi's legacy. I think one of the key points that I want to say is that Lee Njiru thinks that the narrative that was perpetuated around Moi was really the main reason as to why people view Moi the way they view Moi. And he says that a lot of these narratives were perpetuated by people from Mount Kenya region who thought that they were the only people entitled to lead this country. And he also says that for him, as far as is concerned, Moi was a very good person, and Moi did everything he could do to become a good president. But Moi experienced a lot of hate, experienced a lot of, sabotage and a lot of animosity from the Mount Kenya region, to the extent that he had to survive. So Moi did what he did because he needed to survive. He also observes that, anything that Moi tried to do to become the president that he needed to become was opposed by people from the Mount Kenya region, because nothing good could come from Moi. He gave the example of when he started he decided to get an expert from Canada to review the education system of Kenya and proposed that they needed additional universities. He faced a lot of opposition because, and the opposition was such that the question was, why was he diluting education? And that only one university was enough. But then he says that when Mwai Kibaki came on board, he added more universities, and no one from Mount Kenya complained, because for them, anything that came from Moi was bad. He also said that Moi's legacy must not be evaluated in isolation. And he talked about the events that shaped the Moi's legacy. And he talks about the failed coup attempt of 1982. He also talked about some of the coup attempts that were happening in the continent, and also some of the assassinations that were also taking place in the continent. And therefore, those significantly shaped Moi's leadership. And what he did when he talks about, I had somebody speak about how Moi systematically removed Kikuyus from government. What he says was that he was trying to provide a balance so that every other person in Kenya has a fair chance to serve in government. But then he faced a lot of opposition because, again, he cites the Mount Kenya region as thinking that they were the only one entitled to being in government. And therefore, they perpetuated a narrative to paint Moi as one of these, as a leader who was perpetuating tribalism, when indeed what he was doing was to ensure that the Kikuyus who had been predominantly in government were being eased out to give space for other communities. The other thing that he talks about was that I think for him, what he sees as the biggest of Moi's legacy was his commitment, quote unquote. I am reporting in verbatim, to promote peace, to promote cohesion in terms of dealing with tribalism, and also the ways in which Moi was able to expand education. And he gives examples where he says the biggest schools and the main schools used to be in central Kenya. And when Moi decided to disrupt that and make sure that the education opportunities were being availed equally across the country, he faced again a lot of opposition from the Mount Kenya region, who thought that the education was supposed to be a preserve in terms of the good schools, access to education, and stuff like that. And he also cites the opposition that beyond the Mount Kenya region. He also talks about the opposition and the enmity that he had within his own community, given that he came from a smaller Kalenjin community, and therefore he was facing a battle within his Kalenjin community among some of the Luos that thought that they knew better English, and therefore Moi was not educated and not good enough to lead this country, and also the Kikuyu communities who he thinks have a sense of entitlement, quote unquote, in terms of leading this country. And he says that the Kikuyu and the Mount Kenya sense of entitlement has been the reason as to why we are where we are as a country. And he says that the moment this sense of entitlement will be dealt with a view to ensure that every single community in this country has a fair chance and to show that they all have an ability to lead this country, that is when we will have peace. And so for him, he goes on to conclude that Moi made mistakes like any other person. But the people who view Moi negatively and have perpetuated the narrative around Moi from a negative perspective are the people who opposed Moi's leadership, and they had access to the powerful media stations and were able to perpetuate that and not to tell the whole truth around Moi's legacy in a way that is balanced enough for the country to be able to engage with it. And that Moi did what he needed to do to survive. But I'll forward you the recording, because I think his analysis of Moi's legacy really revolves around what he says are the frustrations that Moi encountered in his presidency, and the ways in which he really, there were people who wanted to get rid of him, to kill him, and the people who thought that he didn't merit to be the president. And therefore, from that on, that fundamentally determined how he ruled this country and the people that he surrounded himself with and the decisions that he made, in a sense. Thank you.
Okay, I'll jump in. Thanks, Ruth. I'll jump in because in the interest of time, we are 23 minutes past the hour to which we ought to have finished this discussion. So I have a small task to give a vote of thanks, and this should take me less than 2 minutes. On behalf of KHRC, I want to take this special opportunity to thank our panelists and also the discussants for the intriguing cross-cutting conversation around Moi's legacy. And indeed, I will not go into details because Soila was, highlighting some of the discussions from our panelists and the discussants as we moved on. So particularly, we want to express our gratefulness to Honorable Koige Wamwere. From you, we've learned that state legacies are shared. That was powerful. And we also remain grateful to Mudhoni Kamau. Thank you also for joining us within the short notice that we gave, and also for contributing to this discussion. So also let me express our gratitude to Jerotich Sei. Thank you so much for that very powerful discussion around your family and during the Moi era. We also offer our sincere thanks to George Kegoro. We all know this was this discussion has largely been his baby, and we thank him so much also for leading us as we were putting this together. Asante sana, George. I also want to take this opportunity to also thank Davis Malombe. He is the acting executive director at KHRC. He led us also as a team in putting this together. Asante sana, Davis. Without your support, indeed, we would not make this webinar a success. We also, in a special way, thank Lee Njiru. I know we were all hoping and looking forward to listening in to the clip, but that was not possible because of the technical hitch. However, as promised, we are going to share this with you so that you can be able to listen in at your own time. Thank you so much to him, even in as much as he's not here, we are grateful. I also hereby acknowledge our organizing team, which is also comprised of Ruth, there was Annette, there was Davis Malombe, there was Bernard, there was Moses. Thank you so much. Soila, thank you, all of you, also for putting this together. And again, sorry, I know I missed, I would have also talked about our discussants who also were part of this discussion. Thank you so much. The discussion was led by Winnie Mukaru and Mom. We didn't get the opportunity to see her, but we thank you so much for honoring our invitation and also for sharing with us your thoughts and perspectives. To Ashira Waheire, asante sana. Ongele Opala, tunashukuru. Nelson Ahahukwa, the name is a bit difficult, but I hope I pronounced that right. Tunashukuru sana. Thank you also for creating time to be here. Asante sana also to Njoroge Muigai. Thanks also for organizing this team and participating in this conversation. Our words may not be capable of communicating our sense of gratitude to all the participants. I mean, we've gone almost 1.5 hours, but you've been able to stay in. Thank you so much for participating. Thanks so much even for your patience. Thank you. I really don't have much to say. I'm just grateful that we were able to join in and listen in. And for me and to most of us as well, we did a lot of learning from the discussions that were being made in this meeting. So thank you so much. Asante. Soila, do you have anything to say as the moderator before we close the meeting?
Say that again, Annette.
Anything you'd like to say? I think I'm done.
No, we are done, thanks.
Okay, asanteni sana.
Thank you so much. See you in the next conversation. Yes, George. Bye. Bye.